In today's episode, we are going to look at the 6 most stupid selfie deaths ever recorded. From a man sneaking up a construction crane for a skyline selfie to a traveler stepping into restricted waters for a closer photo, which went wrong in the most crazy way possible. It was May 22nd, 2016, in Business Bay, Dubai. The morning was still, the faint hum of distant traffic drifting across empty streets, while streetlights cast long shadows over half-finished towers. A single crane dominated the skyline, its arms stretching above a construction site that was otherwise silent. Humidity clung to metal, leaving surfaces slick with condensation. Arman Velez, 28, had been in Dubai for 6 weeks, sleeping in a shared apartment near Al Karama, moving between odd jobs while uploading content to his social media accounts. He had filmed from rooftops in Barcelona and construction sites in Berlin, but Dubai's skyline offered something different, a vertical frontier for content, clicks, and fleeting attention. He had studied architecture for 1 semester before dropping out, enough to understand load-bearing principles, but not enough to respect them. Lean and quick to smile, he carried a casual confidence that made dangerous decisions appear effortless. His equipment favored filming over safety, a helmet-mounted action camera, a used drone, and a phone loaded with editing software he had taught himself to use. He had no harness, no chalk bag, no carabiners, only a 6 a.m. window for the golden hour and a construction site where the night security guard often slept in his car near the main gate, far from the service entrance on the eastern perimeter. The crane itself was a high-capacity tower crane, its main arm stretching nearly 650 feet horizontally at a height of roughly 790 feet, 80 stories in a city that measured ambition in altitude. The walkway along the arm was narrow, bordered by a single handrail on one side, with nothing but open air on the other. At that height, wind speeds rise, temperatures drop, and condensation collects on exposed steel overnight. Even minor missteps at extreme heights are amplified, and what might seem manageable on paper becomes deadly in practice. Arman entered the site, slipping through a gap in the chain-link fencing where 2 sections failed to meet. He climbed the vertical ladder inside the crane's mast, taking several minutes to reach the top. There, he paused, then began moving outward along the crane arm. His goal was to frame both his silhouette and the Burj Khalifa in one shot, an image he had sketched in his phone's notes. He had done similar climbs before, but this arm was slicker, the air thinner, the drop far greater. He pressed on. The footage shows him moving deliberately, arms extended for balance, phone in hand to check framing. He was approximately 100 feet out along the arm when he paused, shifted his weight, and adjusted his right foot. The sole of his sneaker, a worn pair of Vans, slid on the condensation-slicked steel. His torso pitched forward. He reached for the handrail but grasped empty air. The camera rotated as the horizon spun, showing the ground rushing closer. The impact occurred at 4:58 a.m. 2 early arriving workers at a nearby concrete pour heard the fall and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived 14 minutes later and pronounced him dead at the scene. Tragedies at extreme heights often unfold in seconds, leaving no room for recovery despite immediate emergency response. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as multiple blunt force trauma from a fall of extreme height. Injuries included catastrophic fractures to the skull, spine, ribs, pelvis, and nearly every major bone, along with severe internal organ damage. Investigators calculated that Arman reached terminal velocity, approximately 120 miles per hour, before impact. Identification required dental records, as his passport photo was insufficient. The helmet camera survived intact, and its footage was used to reconstruct the fall frame by frame. Within a month, the construction company installed biometric locks on all crane access points. Arman's parents traveled to Dubai to recover his remains and requested that all footage be permanently deleted. His social media account remains as a digital memorial to content that ended in tragedy. It was August 3rd, 2015, in Perm, The morning was quiet in a way that made small sounds carry, footsteps and voices drifting across the courtyard below as residents began their day. Sunlight filtered over apartment blocks, casting muted shadows on cracked pavement and rusted playground equipment, while the air carried the faint scent of baking bread. Irina Morozova, 27, had been awake since 6, preparing for the morning with her 1-year-old daughter, Yelena, at her side. She worked part-time at a local pharmacy and spent her evenings editing photos on her phone, adjusting filters and captions to present a life more polished than the one she lived. Social media was central to her routine. She had roughly 1,200 followers and had noticed that images featuring Yelena, especially staged outdoors in natural light, received significantly higher engagement. Neighbors described Irina as attentive but often distracted, focused more on documenting moments than fully experiencing them. She had recently begun following accounts that showcased children in visually striking poses, rarely noting the potential hazards. The aesthetic appealed to her, the risks largely invisible. The balcony itself was standard for its era, concrete, waist-high for an adult, with no mesh or safety netting. Built in 1982, it met the codes of the time, but offered no protection for elevated photography. The drop from the 8th floor to the courtyard below was approximately 79 feet. Irina had taken photos on the balcony before, with Yelena safely on the floor or seated in a chair. That morning, she sought a different composition. Yelena elevated on the railing, framed against the sky and courtyard below, a shot that suggested carefree summer days and a confident mother. Around 10 a.m., Irina positioned her daughter, Yelena, on the outer edge of the playground railing. She held the child firmly under the arms while angling her phone to capture both Yelena and the surrounding playground in the frame. Yelena shifted slightly, squirming against her mother's grip, prompting Irina to adjust her hold and reposition the phone several times in an attempt to get the desired shot. The playground area was moderately crowded, with a few other children nearby, though none were directly on the railing. Security footage from the small shed adjacent to the playground captured the sequence of events in real time. While Irina was focused on the phone, Yelena lost her balance and slipped from her mother's hands. The fall occurred over a brief span of seconds, leaving no opportunity for anyone in the vicinity to intervene. The video shows Yelena descending uncontrollably before making impact with the hard surface below. Two mothers nearby saw the impact and ran immediately. One called emergency services at 10:19 a.m. The other knelt beside the child, who was motionless and bleeding from the head. Paramedics arrived a few minutes later and did not attempt resuscitation. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as severe traumatic brain injury and internal hemorrhaging from a fall from height. The skull was fractured on impact, and multiple rib fractures had damaged the lungs and heart. The autopsy confirmed death occurred within seconds, with no possibility of survival. Yelena's body showed no signs of prior abuse or neglect. Irina was charged with causing death by negligence and sentenced to 2 years in a penal colony. Security footage was submitted as evidence but sealed by court order, but not released publicly for privacy. Within 3 months, the apartment complex installed reinforced mesh barriers on all balconies, a retrofit funded by the Municipal Housing Authority. The courtyard remained quiet that summer, the swings turning slowly in the wind, a reminder of how quickly ordinary routines could turn fatal. It was November 14th, 2017, in a house in Detroit. The evening was quiet in a way that made small sounds carry, footsteps and voices drifting across the rooms as guests moved between spaces. Music hummed through the walls, mingling with laughter, while the faint scent of pizza and beer lingered in the air. Outside, the November wind brushed past streetlights, casting shadows across empty sidewalks. Marcus Hill, 24, had clocked out of his shift at the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Livonia at 7 and driven straight to the party. He wore his work boots and a black hoodie, tired from the long day but restless, seeking the social energy that fatigue made necessary. Marcus grew up in Detroit, graduated from Cass Technical High School with decent grades, and spent the last 3 years working nights to save for a trade certification he had postponed repeatedly. He was well-liked, quick to laugh, and prone to performing for a crowd. Friends later described him as someone who thrived on attention, often dancing when no one else would, or taking photos to project confidence he did not always feel. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no formal training with firearms. His nights off were rare, and parties like this offered him a brief reprieve from the routine of work and study. In the upstairs bedroom, a Glock 19 semi-automatic, chambered in 9mm, had been left on a dresser. The weapon belonged to an acquaintance of the host, who later claimed they thought the room was locked. The gun had no external safety beyond the trigger mechanism, meaning that if a round was chambered, pulling the trigger would discharge it. Marcus entered the room around 11:40 p.m., accompanied by 2 friends, one of whom began recording on a phone. He saw the gun, picked it up, and assumed, as many people do, that it was unloaded. He held it in his right hand, angling it toward his temple, while glancing at the mirror mounted on the closet door. In the brief sequence that followed, he discharged the weapon. The sound of the discharge was sharp and immediate, a flat percussive crack rather than the exaggerated pop heard in movies. The video shows Marcus's body collapsing backward onto the floor as the room fell silent, punctuated only by the panicked movement of friends and the falling phone recording from the scene. One partygoer, Jasmine Carter, called 911 shortly before midnight, while others tried to make sense of what had just happened. Paramedics arrived minutes later and pronounced Marcus dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report listed the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the head with catastrophic brain injury. The bullet had destroyed critical areas responsible for motor control, consciousness, and life support functions. Toxicology confirmed a blood alcohol content of 0.09%, slightly above the legal driving limit. The examiner confirmed that death occurred within seconds, with no possibility of survival. The report noted that Marcus had no pre-existing conditions, and there was no evidence of foul play beyond the accidental discharge. Following the investigation, the firearm was traced to the acquaintance of the host, who lacked a permit and faced charges for illegal possession. 3 attendees were charged with failure to secure a firearm, although the charges were later reduced. The video recording was submitted as evidence, but later became a tool for public safety education. Detroit area nonprofits used it in firearm safety workshops aimed at young adults, emphasizing the risks of leaving weapons unsecured and the dangers of handling guns without training. In the weeks following the incident, friends and family described the impact as profound. Marcus's death prompted discussions among his peers about the casual treatment of firearms at social gatherings, and the house where the party took place underwent informal changes, with attendees avoiding the upstairs bedroom and encouraging better safety practices. The hardwood floors, once a backdrop to laughter and music, now carried the memory of an ordinary night turned tragic, a stark reminder of how quickly negligence and inexperience could result in irreversible loss. This incident demonstrates the intersection of negligence, inexperience, and environment. It was July 4th, 2014, in Bastrop County. The afternoon was quiet in a way that made small sounds carry, footsteps and voices drifting across the open property as a group gathered to drink. The air smelled faintly of barbecue smoke and dry grass, while boxes of fireworks sat nearby, labeled for professional use only. Eli Harper had arrived around 2 in the afternoon carrying a cooler of beer. At 22, he worked construction in Cedar Creek, moving between roofing and framing crews, depending on seasonal demand, and had spent the morning on a roofing job that left his shoulders sunburned. Friends described him as loud, restless, and prone to stunts that bordered on reckless, jumping from dock roofs into shallow water, lighting firecrackers in his hand, or rolling down hills in makeshift carts. He had no criminal record, though he had been treated in the emergency room twice for alcohol-related injuries, neither of which affected his behavior. Eli's phone contained videos of small stunts and experiments he had attempted privately, all intended for amusement or social media attention, none posted publicly. The mortar-style fireworks were 3-inch shells launched from tubes, designed to ascend 50 to 100 feet before detonating. Each contained a lift charge and a timed burst charge. They were not intended for handheld use, and the fuse burned for roughly 3 to 5 seconds. Witnesses later estimated that Eli had consumed at least 10 beers over the preceding 4 hours, a level of impairment confirmed post-mortem. The combination of alcohol, inexperience with explosives, and peer encouragement created a high-risk, uncontrolled situation. Around dusk in the evening, Eli removed one of the mortar shells from a box near the fire pit and placed it atop his head, balancing it upright. His friend, Noah Lee, began recording the scene on a phone. Another friend, Sarah Lynn, urged him to put the device down, but her voice was drowned out by laughter and encouragement from others. Eli tilted his head slightly to stabilize the shell, which rested precariously, with the fuse extending past his ear. His friend, Matt Stone, also intoxicated, lit the fuse in the early evening. The expectation among the group was that Eli would remove the firework before ignition. He did not. Within 2 seconds, the lift charge ignited while the shell remained atop Eli's head. The explosive force was directed downward rather than upward, resulting in instantaneous catastrophic injury. Eli collapsed immediately onto the dirt, his body motionless. Observers described the scene as silent after the initial blast. Sarah ran toward the house to call 911. Emergency services arrived roughly 16 minutes later. Paramedics confirmed that Eli was deceased on arrival, with no resuscitation attempted. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as catastrophic trauma to the head and neck caused by explosive force at close range. The skull was fractured into multiple fragments, the brain destroyed beyond recognition, and severe damage occurred to the cervical spine and surrounding tissue. Death was instantaneous, with no possibility of survival. Investigators confirmed there was no evidence of pre-existing injury or intent to harm others. Matt Stone was charged with criminally negligent homicide and accepted a plea deal, resulting in probation and community service. The fireworks vendor received civil penalties for selling commercial-grade explosives without proper licensing. The video recorded by Noah Lee was submitted as evidence and sealed per the family's request and was never released publicly. The property owners later added barriers and warning signage for fireworks storage, and friends described the incident as a sobering reminder of how quickly seemingly routine celebrations can become fatal. It was January 9th, 2018, at a frozen lake in Minnesota. The afternoon was quiet in a way that made small sounds carry, the faint rustle of wind and distant creeks drifting across the ice as sunlight stretched long shadows from nearby trees. The surface appeared smooth and solid, though recent thawing had created areas of hidden weakness. Emily Larson, 25, arrived at a public access point with 3 friends, carrying only her camera bag and winter clothing. She was methodical and careful in most aspects of her life, yet adventurous in her photography. Over the past 2 years, she had developed a particular interest in natural landscapes and seasonal changes, building a small portfolio of winter images. On this afternoon, she aimed to photograph formations near the eastern shore, hoping to add to her collection before a local competition. She carried no equipment to assess ice stability and had no prior experience evaluating conditions. Lake ice safety varies widely. 4 inches of solid ice can generally support a person on foot, while 8 to 12 inches are recommended for vehicles. Currents, underwater springs, recent thaws, and snow cover can create hidden weak spots. Measurements later confirmed that, on this afternoon, ice thickness near the shore ranged from 2 to 5 inches, with thinner areas caused by underwater springs and wave action. In the mid-afternoon, Emily stepped onto the ice roughly 15 feet from the shore. Her friends remained on the bank, watching her, and one holding a phone to record the scene. She advanced cautiously, placing each foot carefully, testing the stability of the frozen surface beneath her weight. Her attention was focused on a cluster of ice ridges a short distance ahead, which she intended to photograph. The sunlight reflected off the ice, creating a stark contrast between the smooth surfaces and the jagged ridges she was approaching. About 40 feet from the shore, a sharp, cracking sound suddenly echoed across the ice, a brittle, snapping report that carried through the quiet afternoon air. Emily paused, glancing back at her friends on the bank, then shifted her weight and continued forward. She remained unaware that the ice beneath her had already begun to weaken and was no longer able to support her fully. Each step pressed on the fragile surface, which had begun to fracture along unseen lines running beneath the top layer. Minutes later, the ice failed. A roughly 6-foot section fractured into irregular plates, and Emily fell into 34-degree water. The sudden cold caused an immediate loss of coordinated movement. She reached for the ice edge, but each attempt caused the surrounding ice to break further, leaving her unable to gain support in the freezing water. Video from one friend's phone shows Emily struggling for approximately 90 seconds. Her movements gradually slowed, and she became unable to maintain her position above the water. Shortly afterward, she fully submerged. Emergency services were contacted within minutes. Responders arrived roughly 8 minutes later. Ice conditions prevented immediate recovery, and divers did not enter the water until the following morning. The county medical examiner determined the cause of death as drowning, with hypothermia contributing. Water was present in her lungs, indicating she was still breathing at the time of submersion. The extreme cold impaired muscle function and cognitive ability, preventing escape. There were no traumatic injuries beyond minor abrasions to the hands, consistent with contact with broken ice edges. The time of death was estimated within minutes of submersion. Emily's body was recovered 3 days later, approximately 30 feet from the initial fall point in 12 feet of water. In response to the incident, local authorities increased signage and patrols at public access points, and the friends involved declined media requests and did not release the recording publicly. The event became a reminder of how quickly recreational activity on frozen lakes can become fatal when environmental risks are underestimated. Nature offers no second chances when judgment fails. It was February 11th, 2013, at a beach along the northern Queensland coast. The morning was quiet in a way that made small sounds carry, the lap of waves and distant bird calls drifting across the empty shoreline as red and yellow flags marked stretches of sand. Sunlight glinted off the calm water, and a warm breeze stirred the sparse coastal vegetation. Sophie Reed, 23, had been traveling in Australia for 3 weeks, moving up the coast with no fixed itinerary. She carried a waterproof phone case to record her surroundings and a small bag with personal items. Energetic and adventurous, Sophie had spent the past 2 years building a modest social media presence focused on travel photography, each new location pushing her to capture more striking images than the last. She had swum at unpatrolled beaches before without incident, and the concept of hidden danger had not registered as real in her mind. Box jellyfish, specifically Chironex fleckeri, are among the most venomous creatures in the ocean. Their translucent tentacles can extend several meters and contain millions of stinging cells that deliver venom capable of causing extreme pain, paralysis, and cardiac arrest within minutes. Stinger season runs from November through May, peaking in February, and designated swim areas at patrolled beaches provide safety enclosures. Sophie was at an unpatrolled stretch where warning flags were posted and no protective measures were in place. Shortly after 9 in the morning, Sophie stepped into the water, wading up to her knees while holding her phone to record herself. She wore a standard swimsuit with no protective clothing. The water was calm and clear, the jellyfish invisible against the pale blue surface. Within moments, the jellyfish tentacle made contact across her right thigh and calf. The reaction was immediate. Sophie experienced intense pain described by witnesses as a combination of burning and electric shock. Startled, she attempted to step backward, but in doing so, her left arm and torso brushed against additional tentacles. Observers noted that her movements became erratic and uncoordinated as the venom rapidly began to affect her cardiovascular and nervous systems, causing widespread discomfort and partial loss of muscular control. 2 other travelers on the beach, approximately 100 meters away, noticed her struggle. One, Alex Moore, ran to the water and called emergency services, while the other, Jamie Lee, sprinted to the nearest lifeguard station. Lifeguards arrived 4 minutes later and found Sophie face down in shallow water, unresponsive, with visible tentacle marks across her limbs and torso. They pulled her to shore and began CPR immediately, continuing until paramedics arrived 20 minutes after the initial call. Despite advanced life support, including epinephrine and treatment to neutralize remaining stingers, Sophie did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead at the scene. Venomous marine life delivers rapid, lethal effects, leaving minimal response time. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as cardiac arrest induced by box jellyfish envenomation, with drowning as a contributing factor. Stings covered roughly 30% of her body surface area, delivering a lethal dose of venom that caused immediate disruption to heart rhythm and respiratory function. Survival was considered unlikely given the extent of exposure and the delay in treatment. Sophie's phone was recovered and contained footage up until the moment of first contact. Following the incident, local authorities extended beach closures and installed additional multilingual warning signs depicting jellyfish injuries. Sophie's family later authorized use of her final footage in a public marine safety campaign, which has been incorporated into educational programs for visitors along the coast. Even experience and preparation cannot always prevent naturally occurring dangers. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now